The Alpha King hid as a beggar, and the poorest Omega shared her only bread with him. Its cobbled streets were empty, except for the occasional shadow slipping between alleys or the distant howl of a dog echoing against stone walls. In the heart of the city, the palace gleamed like a crown of light, its high towers touching the sky. From there the Alpha King ruled with an iron hand, feared and respected by all. Yet in those very streets, the poor suffered quietly, hidden behind tattered curtains and locked doors. Eldrick, the Alpha King, knew all this. He had worn the crown for many years, and each night the weight of his kingdom pressed heavier upon his shoulders. Rumors whispered of his cruelty, yet they did not know the truth. Behind the stern mask, Eldrick carried a heart that had known love and betrayal, and a longing he had buried long ago. Tonight, he would cast aside his crown and walk among his people, unseen. Dressed in rags and dirt, his once gilded armor replaced by a thin, worn cloak, he stepped into the streets. His golden hair was hidden beneath a tattered hood, and his sharp eyes, so often feared in the throne room, softened behind the guise of poverty. No one would suspect that this beggar, shivering and limping, was the ruler of Eldoria. The first hours were harder than he imagined. The cold pierced his bones, and the hunger that clawed at his stomach reminded him of his mortality. He passed empty stalls and broken carts, watching children scavenging for scraps and mothers whispering prayers for food. His heart ached, but he forced himself to keep moving. He wanted to see the city as it truly was, not as the polished halls of the palace might deceive him. It was near the edge of the marketplace that he first saw her. Leora, the poorest Omega in Eldoria, moved with quiet grace despite her ragged clothes. Her hair, dark as the night itself, fell in loose waves around her shoulders, and her eyes, wide and clear, seemed to shine even in the shadows. She carried a small loaf of bread in her hands, clutching it as if it were more precious than gold. Eldrick collapsed near the fountain, barely able to keep himself upright. His body trembled, teeth chattering. The people around him turned away, afraid of a beggar, but Leora approached. Are you cold?" she asked softly, kneeling beside him. Her voice was gentle, not filled with pity but with genuine concern. Eldrick could only nod, too weak to speak. His pride, so carefully shielded, wavered. Without hesitation, Leora broke her small loaf in two. "Here," she said, holding out one half. "You should eat this. I can share it with you." Hunger twisted Eldrick's chest, but it was not just his stomach that stirred. There was something in her gesture, pure and fearless, that moved him more than he had ever expected. He took the bread with trembling hands and bit into it. The warmth of it, the simple kindness, made his eyes sting. You are too kind," he said hoarsely, his voice rough from disuse. "I do what I can," Leora replied, brushing dirt from his sleeve. "It is not much, but it is all I have." For a long moment they sat in silence, the sounds of the sleeping city surrounding them. Eldrick, accustomed to commands and obedience, found himself disarmed by her humility and courage. Leora, accustomed to hardship, sensed something in him that she could not name, a depth, a pain, a truth beyond his rags. Suddenly, the clatter of boots on stone echoed down the street. City guards, rough men with sharp eyes, were sweeping through the marketplace. They had seen the beggar and now approached with suspicion. "Move along," one shouted, his voice harsh. "No loitering here." Leora's eyes widened. She stepped in front of Eldrick, holding up her hands. "He is sick," she said. "Leave him be," the guard sneered. "A sick beggar does not belong here. Come." Eldrick's pulse quickened. He could show his strength, call down fire from his hands, or strike with his hidden skill, but to do so would reveal himself. He wanted to stay invisible, to continue his journey among his people. Leora pressed closer, whispering, "Please don't leave me, please." In that moment Eldrick felt a strange, almost forbidden warmth. It was more than gratitude, it was recognition, connection. He lowered his head, hiding his face, and whispered, "Stay close to me." The guards moved forward and Leora grabbed his arm. Together, they ducked into a narrow alley, hearts pounding. Shadows swallowed them, and Eldrick felt the thrill and terror of freedom mixed with fear. Once hidden, Leora leaned against the wall, breathing heavily. Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Eldrick shook his head. "I am no one," he said, "just a tired man in need of rest." She studied him for a long moment, suspicion and curiosity warring in her eyes. "You are more than that," she said softly. "I can feel it. Something in you is different." Eldrick swallowed, the words tasting strange on his tongue. No one had ever seen him like this. No one had ever looked past the mask. "Perhaps," he murmured, "but that is not important. What matters is the kindness you have shown." Her eyes softened. "Kindness is all I have to give, but it is enough for now." Night deepened around them. The city's sounds faded into a distant hum, and for the first time in many years Eldrick allowed himself to rest, leaning against the cold stone wall beside Leora. He felt something unfamiliar, a fragile trust, a flicker of hope. Yet even in this quiet he was not safe. Outside the alley the city stirred. Rogues and thieves prowled, hungry for opportunity. And in the palace whispers began. The Alpha King had vanished. Some said he had left voluntarily, others whispered of betrayal and curse. Factions within the court stirred like restless predators, sensing weakness, waiting for the chance to seize power. Eldrick did not yet know the dangers that awaited him beyond the streets, but he understood one thing clearly. He could not leave Leora unprotected. The girl who had shared her only bread with him had given him more than food. She had given him a glimpse of what he had long denied himself: trust, warmth, and perhaps even love. Leora, too, felt the weight of their meeting. She had always known hunger and fear, but the man beside her, though strange and secretive, made her heart beat with something new, something dangerous and thrilling. She could not explain why she felt drawn to him, why the stranger in rags had taken her simple act of kindness and transformed it into something far larger than herself. The night pressed on. Rain began to fall in soft, silvery sheets, and Eldrick shivered against the cold. Leora wrapped her cloak around him, her hands trembling as she adjusted the fabric. "It will be all right," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Eldrick's gaze met hers, and for the first time he allowed a flicker of his true self to shine through the mask of beggary. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "because of you it might be." A sudden shout broke through the night, a cry of distress from somewhere deeper in the market streets. Eldrick's heart leapt. He knew he could intervene, could step into the darkness and show the power he had hidden for so long. But to do so would risk revealing who he truly was and endanger Leora, the one person who had shown him kindness without fear or expectation. "Stay behind me," he whispered. His hand brushed hers, and for a moment both felt the electric tension of proximity, the unspoken promise of protection and connection. Leora nodded, though her hands were trembling. "I trust you," she said softly. Eldrick rose slowly, his body weary but resolute. Together they moved toward the sound, shadows among shadows. And as they stepped into the unknown, the city seemed to hold its breath. The night had only just begun, and already a bond had formed, fragile, dangerous, and beautiful. The Alpha King hid as a beggar, yet in the smallest act of sharing, he had found a spark of something greater. And the Poorest Omega, who had offered her only bread, had unwittingly touched the heart of a man who had known power, fear, and isolation beyond imagining. Beyond the alley the guards searched still, and unseen eyes watched the streets. Eldrick knew this was only the beginning. The world he had left behind, the palace, the crown, the court, would not forget his absence. And Leora, he could not bear the thought of losing her, not now, not ever. As the rain fell harder, mixing with the city's dirt and shadow, Eldrick and Leora pressed forward. One step at a time, one heartbeat at a time, they moved together into the darkness. And somewhere deep in the city, the first flickers of destiny stirred, ready to draw them into a world of danger, magic, and choices that would test their courage, their hearts, and their very souls. The streets of Eldoria had grown quiet once more, but the city was far from safe. Shadows clung to every corner, whispering secrets of those who moved unseen. Eldrick, still disguised in tattered clothes, held Leora's hand as they fled through the narrow alleys. Her small fingers were warm and firm in his, a strange comfort that made him forget, even for a moment, the hunger in his belly and the chill in his bones. "You can't keep running like this," Leora whispered, her dark eyes searching his face. "They'll find us sooner or later." Eldrick shook his head. "Not if we move carefully. The city forgets the poor, but it remembers the powerful, and I am not safe here, not fully." They ducked behind a pile of broken crates, catching their breath. The faint sounds of guards searching the streets passed by, oblivious to the small shadow slipping through their grasp. Leora's chest heaved, not from exertion alone, but from the fear that she had unknowingly placed herself in danger. "You don't have to tell me who you are," she said quietly. "I only know something about you isn't ordinary." Eldrick's lips pressed together. He wanted to speak, to tell her the truth, but he could not. Not yet. The weight of his crown, even hidden beneath rags, pressed on his soul. "You are wise beyond your years," he said softly. "But some truths are dangerous." Leora nodded. "Then I will not ask, just stay close." He allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smile. The girl's courage was remarkable. She feared him in no way, though she had no reason to trust a stranger. Her trust was a gift, simple yet profound, and it stirred something in him that had long been dormant, a sense of protection, of responsibility, and something deeper that he did not yet understand. The alleys led them to a hidden entrance, a narrow stairway descending beneath the city. The walls were damp, and a faint smell of earth and stone filled the air. Eldrick paused at the entrance, listening. No footsteps followed, no shadows lingered. He led Leora down the steps, one careful foot at a time. They emerged into a small underground chamber, lit by the faint glow of moss and distant crystals embedded in the walls. The space was quiet, safe, and empty, a secret refuge beneath the city streets. Eldrick sat heavily against the cold stone, and Leora knelt beside him, her small hands brushing at his torn cloak. "Rest," she whispered. "You are wounded. Though I cannot see it, I can feel it." Eldrick allowed himself to close his eyes, leaning back against the wall. For hours he had been the beggar, the invisible man, the shadow in the streets. And now, in the quiet of this hidden chamber, he allowed himself a moment of peace. Leora's presence was soothing, a light against the darkness he had carried for so long. You saved me," he murmured. "I should not have risked you." "I had to," she replied firmly. "No one deserves to be left alone in the streets, not even a beggar." His gaze fell on her, and for a long moment he saw more than just the poor girl who had shared her bread. He saw strength, courage, and a quiet nobility that surpassed the nobility of any throne. "You are remarkable," he said quietly. "I have seen much of this world, but rarely someone like you." Leora's eyes widened slightly. "You speak strangely for a beggar," she said softly. "Most men would boast or demand something in return. You only speak the truth." Eldrick looked away, ashamed. Truth was both a weapon and a burden for a king. "Perhaps truth is easier when no one knows who you are," he said. The night deepened, and a silence fell between them. It was not uncomfortable, but alive, filled with unspoken thoughts and the weight of unshared stories. Outside, the city continued to sleep uneasily, unaware of the two figures in the hidden chamber, bound together by chance and courage. But even in this refuge, danger lingered. Eldrick knew the palace would not ignore his absence. Factions within the court were already stirring, waiting for any sign of weakness. And in the streets, rogues and thieves prowled, drawn to the scent of vulnerability. Leora broke the silence. "Tell me, what is it you fear most?" she asked, her voice gentle. Eldrick hesitated. Fear was not something a king often admitted. It was weakness. And yet here in this quiet chamber with her, he felt the strange urge to confess. "I fear," he began slowly, that my people will suffer because of my mistakes, that I cannot protect them, that I am not enough. Leora placed her hand lightly on his arm. You are more than enough, she said softly. You do not have to carry everything alone. Her words, simple as they were, cut through the armor he had built around his heart. For the first time in years, Eldrick felt a spark of hope, fragile yet undeniable. Hope that perhaps he could be more than the distant, feared ruler. Hope that he could be someone who mattered to someone beyond the throne. Hours passed. The sound of rain tapped softly against the hidden stone above them, a lullaby for the weary. Eldrick finally allowed himself to relax, leaning against the wall, letting Leora's quiet presence ease the tension in his body. For the first time he felt safe, but safety was fleeting. A sudden shout echoed through the streets above, sharp and urgent. Eldrick's eyes snapped open and he instinctively rose to his feet. Leora mirrored his motion, her hand finding his. "What is it?" she asked, fear threading her voice. "Someone needs help," he said, his voice low but firm. "I do not know what danger waits, but I cannot ignore it." Leora's gaze softened. "Then we go together," she said. "I will not leave you to face it alone." Together, they climbed the narrow stairs back toward the streets. The rain had intensified, turning the cobbled roads slick and treacherous. Shadows moved in the corners of their vision, figures seeking trouble, drawn by the commotion. Eldrick moved cautiously, alert and tense. As they reached the marketplace, the source of the shout became clear. A small child was trapped atop a broken cart, surrounded by a group of rough men. Panic twisted the child's face, and the men's intentions were cruel, though they were motivated more by mischief than malice. Eldrick's heart ached at the sight. He could step forward, reveal his strength, and end the threat in an instant. But to do so would risk revealing his identity to the city, and to Leora, who had already shown him more trust than anyone ever had. "I will handle this," he whispered to her, his hand brushing hers in a fleeting touch that carried unspoken reassurance. Leora's eyes widened. "No," she said firmly. "We face this together." They moved forward cautiously, stepping into the flickering light of a lantern. The men noticed them, startled by the sudden appearance of two figures in the storm. "Get away," one shouted, brandishing a stick. "This isn't your business." Eldrick held up a hand, calm but commanding. "It is my business," he said, voice steady. "Leave the child alone." The men hesitated, sizing him up. They had expected fear, not courage, not the strange authority in his eyes. Leora stood beside him, small but unyielding, her gaze fierce. Together, they formed a barrier that the mischief-makers could not easily breach. The tension was sharp, like a drawn sword. Then, just as the men lunged, Eldrick moved with unexpected swiftness. He disarmed the nearest one, forcing him to stumble back, while Leora guided the child safely to the ground. The others fled, unwilling to face the strange, commanding presence that held them at bay. Breathless, Eldrick knelt beside the child, checking for injury. The boy's wide eyes looked at him in awe, and for a fleeting moment Eldrick felt a spark of connection, a reminder of why he bore the crown at all. You saved me," the child whispered. Eldrick smiled faintly, a rare softness crossing his face. "No one should suffer alone," he said. His gaze then shifted to Leora, and a silent understanding passed between them. This bond, forged in danger and trust, was something neither could deny. The rain began to ease, leaving the streets glistening under the silver light of the moon. Eldrick and Leora walked back toward the hidden stairway, the child following quietly, safe for now. They did not speak much. Words were unnecessary. Their actions, their shared courage, had said more than words ever could. Yet even in this moment of quiet triumph, danger lingered. Somewhere in the city, eyes watched, waiting. The palace would not remain silent, and Eldrick knew that his absence would not go unnoticed for long. And Leora, though she did not yet know it, her life had changed forever. She had seen courage, strength, and the flicker of something extraordinary in the beggar beside her. And she had given him her trust, a rare and precious gift that would bind them in ways neither could yet understand. The city slept uneasily, shadows shifting beneath rooftops and in the narrow alleys. And beneath it all, Eldrick felt a quiet certainty. Their journey had only just begun. Cliffhanger. A whisper of danger that neither Eldrick nor Leora could see, yet a force that would test their trust, their courage, and the fragile bond forming between them. The journey of survival, secrets, and destiny had only just begun. The city of Eldoria had not slept well in the nights since the Alpha King vanished. Whispers had grown into rumors, and rumors into unease. Factions within the palace stirred like restless shadows, each plotting to gain from his absence. But beyond the marble walls and gilded halls, the streets told another story, a story of fear, hardship, and unexpected courage. Eldrick, still hidden beneath the disguise of a beggar, moved with purpose through the misty streets. The night air was thick with rain and fog, curling around the lanterns that swayed above the cobblestones. Leora walked beside him, quiet but vigilant, her small hand brushing against his sleeve whenever they passed through the darker alleys. "Are you sure the child is safe?" she asked softly, her voice almost drowned by the drizzle. Eldrick nodded, eyes scanning the empty corners and shadowed doorways. "Safe for now," he said, "but there are more dangers than we can see. The city is restless, and the palace, they do not forgive absence lightly." Leora's dark eyes widened. "They would harm you." He shook his head slowly. "Not openly, but fear and power are dangerous. Even a king can be challenged if the wrong people see weakness." For hours they moved cautiously, slipping between alleys, avoiding the watchful eyes of guards and thieves. They eventually found refuge in another abandoned part of the city, a collapsed building with walls covered in moss and broken beams. It smelled of damp stone and earth, but it was safe, hidden from the eyes above. Eldrick leaned against a wall, his body weary from the night's exertions. "We cannot stay here forever," he said. "Sooner or later I must return to the city proper. The palace, the people, they need me, whether they know it or not." Leora studied him quietly, her brows furrowed. "If you are a beggar, as you claim, why do you speak as if the palace depends on you?" He met her gaze, a shadow of pain crossing his features. Because I am not truly a beggar. And yet, if the people of the city see me only as a king, they may never see me as human." Her heart ached for him. She had seen his kindness, his fear, and his strength, yet he hid it all behind a mask. "Then perhaps being human is enough," she whispered, "even for a king." For a brief moment, Eldrick allowed himself to feel something he had not felt in years, the quiet comfort of trust. Leora's courage and honesty were a balm to his wounded heart, a reminder that not all hearts were hardened by power and fear, but peace was fleeting. A sudden, cold wind swept through the collapsed building, extinguishing the small lantern they had lit. The shadows deepened, and Eldrick's instincts screamed danger. Somewhere beyond the walls, a faint whisper of magic drifted through the air, an unnatural hum that set his teeth on edge. "Magic," he murmured. "Someone is near." Leora tensed. "Magic, what do you mean?" He rose carefully, listening. "Not ordinary magic, old magic, accursed magic. It lingers in this city, hidden, waiting, and it has taken interest in us." The hairs on Leora's neck stood on end. "Interest?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Eldrick shook his head. "Not friendly. It tests those it touches, forcing them to reveal their true selves. And sometimes it punishes what it cannot control." Before Leora could ask more, a shadow moved across the ruined floor. Eldrick stepped in front of her, his hand brushing against the hidden dagger at his side, not for attack, but for protection. A figure emerged from the shadows, cloaked and silent. The air around it shimmered faintly, like heat over water. Eldrick could feel the pulse of power radiating from the figure, a dangerous, unnatural energy that made his blood run cold. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice calm but firm. The figure did not answer. Instead, it raised a hand and a wave of dark energy rippled toward them. The building shuddered, dust falling from the walls and ceiling. Leora stumbled, but Eldrick caught her, holding her close. "You cannot hide from me, Alpha King," the figure whispered, voice like silk over steel. "I know who you are and I know what you fear." Eldrick felt a chill. Somehow this figure knew. Somehow it had pierced the rags, the disguise, and the small acts of kindness that had brought him here. He squared his shoulders. "I do not fear what I must face," he said, though the words trembled slightly. "And I will not harm the innocent to protect myself." The figure paused, as if considering his words. Then it laughed softly, a sound that seemed to echo from nowhere and everywhere at once. "You are a rare one, Alpha King, so bound by pride, yet so easily swayed by compassion. That weakness will be your test." "What do you want from me?" Eldrick demanded. "To see if your heart is worthy," the figure said. "To see if your choices can undo the curse that haunts this city, this kingdom, and you." Leora gripped his arm. "Curse?" she asked, fear and curiosity intertwining in her voice. Eldrick looked at her, and for the first time he allowed her to see a shadow of his truth. "Long ago," he said quietly, "a curse was placed upon this kingdom. It has lain hidden, feeding on fear and pain, waiting for the right moment to awaken. And now it stirs again." The figure moved closer, and Eldrick felt the pull of its magic. It was oppressive, testing his will, weighing his heart against invisible scales. He took a deep breath and focused on Leora, on the child they had saved, on the streets he had walked disguised as a beggar. He felt their trust, their courage, their hope, and it steadied him. "You cannot break me," he said firmly, voice strong. "I will not let fear or power rule my heart. I choose compassion. I choose to protect, not destroy." The figure hesitated, as if surprised by his defiance. Then with a flick of its hand it vanished, leaving a faint shimmer in the air. The building was quiet once more. Leora exhaled, trembling. "That was magic, real magic." Eldrick nodded, his jaw tight. "Yes, and it is only the beginning. The curse will not rest." "And neither can we." She looked at him, eyes wide with awe. "You are more than I imagined. Even as a beggar, even in disguise, you are strong." He allowed a small, rare smile. "Strength alone is not enough. One must have heart, courage, and wisdom. And you remind me that even the smallest acts of kindness can light the darkest night." Her cheeks warmed. "I only did what I could. But that was enough," he said softly, "and it was noticed." The rain had stopped, leaving the city slick and glimmering under the moonlight. Eldrick and Leora returned to the hidden alleyways, moving carefully, alert to every shadow. Somewhere above, the city continued to stir, oblivious to the magic and danger beneath its streets. For a while, they walked in silence. Then Leora asked quietly, "Do you think we will ever be safe?" Eldrick shook his head. "Not completely. There will always be danger, curses, and those who seek power, but we can face it together. That is what matters." Her hand found his again, a small, reassuring touch. "Together," she whispered. They pressed on, moving through the sleeping city, knowing that the curse was a living thing, watching, testing, waiting. Eldrick felt its presence, like a shadow that clung to him, yet he no longer felt powerless. He had Leora, her trust and courage, and something within himself that he had almost forgotten: hope. Hours passed, and dawn began to creep over the city, painting the rooftops in pale gold. Eldrick and Leora paused on a small bridge, looking out over the river that cut through the heart of Eldoria. Its waters shimmered, reflecting both the beauty and danger of the world they lived in. "You saved the child," Leora said softly. "But what about the city, the people? Will the curse ever leave?" Eldrick's gaze was distant. "Perhaps not," he said. "Perhaps it will always linger. But every choice, every act of courage, every moment of trust can weaken it. That is why I must face it and why I must protect you." She nodded, understanding more than words could express. Their bond had grown stronger in the night, tempered by danger, trust, and the unspoken recognition that they needed each other, not just for survival, but for something greater. but the city was not yet done testing them. A faint whisper drifted across the river, soft but unmistakable, calling Leora's name. Eldrick tensed, heart pounding. The curse had many forms and its reach was far. He drew Leora close. "Stay with me," he said firmly. "Whatever comes, we face it together, always." Her fingers tightened around his. "Always," she agreed. And as the first rays of sunlight touched the city, painting the cobblestones in gold, Eldrick realized that their journey was far from over. The curse was only beginning to test them, and the choices they made now would shape not only their lives but the fate of the entire kingdom. Cliffhanger. He whispered a single word like a promise and a threat. Omega. Leora's name had been spoken, and Eldrick knew the trials ahead would be darker, more dangerous, and more personal than anything they had faced. The storm had passed, but Eldoria was far from calm. Mist curled across the rooftops, and the river ran dark and swift, reflecting the pale light of dawn. The city streets were eerily silent, yet Eldrick could feel danger lingering in every shadow. Somewhere in the heart of the kingdom, old magic stirred. The curse he had felt in the ruins of the city's alleys had grown stronger, drawn to those who carried hope and courage. Leora walked beside him, small but resolute. Her hand brushed against his sleeve, and for a brief moment, Eldrick allowed himself to forget the weight of crowns, curses, and power. She had changed everything for him with a single act of kindness, sharing her only bread. That small gesture had become a bond stronger than fear, stronger than magic, stronger than even the curse itself. "We should not be out in the open," Leora whispered, her dark eyes scanning the streets. "The city is too quiet. It feels wrong." Eldrick nodded. "The curse tests those it finds worthy. It will follow us and it will challenge us. But we cannot hide forever. If we are to break it, we must face it." They moved cautiously through the mist, following the river that cut through the city like a dark vein. The air grew colder, and the faint hum of ancient magic grew louder, like a heartbeat beneath the earth. Eldrick felt the pull of the curse in his chest, a pressure that made every breath heavy. "Why us?" Leora asked softly, voice trembling slightly. "Why would this curse care about two people like us?" Eldrick's jaw tightened. "It feeds on fear, regret, and ambition," he said, "but also on hope and courage. We are small in the eyes of the world, yet our choices matter. That is why it has found us." The river led them to a ruined temple, perched atop jagged cliffs overlooking the sea. Waves crashed below, white against black rocks, and the wind screamed through broken columns. The temple was ancient, abandoned, and yet alive with magic that curled through every crack and shadow. Eldrick stepped forward, heart pounding. "This is it," he said quietly. "The heart of the curse." Leora's eyes widened at the sight. "It's beautiful," she whispered, though there was fear behind her awe, "and terrifying." Inside the temple, shadows moved as if alive. The air shimmered with energy, and the faint whisper of voices echoed through the walls. Eldrick felt the weight of destiny pressing on him, and he knew the test ahead would demand everything he had, his strength, his courage, and his heart. Suddenly the air before them twisted and a figure emerged, a sorcerer cloaked in dark robes, eyes glowing with the power of the old world. He spoke with a voice that was both calm and terrifying. "You have come," he said. "You walk the path of choice, Alpha King. And yet you do not walk it alone. This Omega, this girl, she is part of your fate." Eldrick stepped in front of Leora, hand brushing against the hidden dagger at his side, not for attack but for protection. "We do not fear the curse," he said firmly. "We will not harm the innocent to save ourselves, and we will not falter." The sorcerer laughed softly. "You believe courage alone can defeat centuries of darkness. You underestimate the power of old magic, the weight of broken promises, the depth of fear in men's hearts." Leora stepped forward, her hand finding Eldrick's. "We do not fight alone," she said, "and we do not fight for ourselves. We fight for the city, for the people, and for what is right." The sorcerer's eyes narrowed. "Brave words," he said, "but courage alone cannot break a curse." Only sacrifice, only truth can undo the binds that tie the city and its king. Eldrick clenched his fists. Then we will face it. Whatever it asks, whatever it demands, we will not turn away. The temple trembled, dust falling from broken arches. The sorcerer raised his hand, and a wave of energy surged toward them. Shadows rose from the floor, twisting into forms of fear and regret. The memories of Eldrick's failures as king, the mistakes he had buried, the times he had allowed fear to guide his hand. Face them, the sorcerer whispered. Only when you confront your own darkness can the curse be broken. Eldrick's heart raced. The shadows pressed closer, whispering his failures, mocking his attempts at mercy. He felt panic rise, but then he felt Leora's hand on his arm, steady and unwavering. "You are not alone," she said softly. "Remember the bread, remember the trust, remember the courage." He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He remembered her act of kindness, the way she had shared her only bread with him when he was weakest. He remembered the trust in her eyes, the courage she had shown standing beside him. Slowly he let the shadows pass through him, acknowledging them without fear, without anger, without shame. The temple shook and the shadows screamed, but Eldrick stood firm. Leora's hand squeezed his, and together they faced the darkness. Then a new wave of magic surged through the room. The sorcerer's power tried to pull Leora into shadow, testing her courage, testing their bond. She stumbled, but Eldrick caught her, holding her close. "Together," he whispered. "Together," she echoed. Their hands intertwined, their hearts aligned. They faced the curse not as king and beggar, not as alpha and omega, but as equals bound by trust, courage, and the choices they had made together. The shadows writhed and twisted, but they could not break them. Light began to rise from their hands, small at first, then growing, spreading through the temple like dawn breaking across the horizon. The sorcerer hissed, unable to contain the power of their combined courage. "No," he shouted. "You cannot undo what is older than time." But Eldrick and Leora did not waver. They stepped forward, hearts strong, hands held, and with a final surge of light the shadows shattered. The temple trembled, then grew still, bathed in soft golden light. The curse had been broken. Eldrick sank to his knees, exhausted but alive. Leora knelt beside him, her hands resting on his. They looked at each other, and for the first time there was no fear, only relief and an unspoken bond that could never be broken. We did it," she whispered. "Yes," he said softly, voice hoarse, "because we faced it together." The sorcerer had vanished, leaving no trace but the echo of his warning. Eldrick knew the threat of old magic would linger, but its power over the city and his heart had been broken. He was free. And more importantly, he had found something far greater than power: trust, courage, and love. They stood together, looking out over Eldoria. The city had survived the storm, the curse, and the shadows of fear. And while there would still be challenges, the bond between them was stronger than any magic, any crown, or any curse. Leora looked up at him, her dark eyes shining. "What now?" she asked. Eldrick smiled, a rare and genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Now we rebuild together. Not as king and beggar, not as alpha and omega, but as two people who chose to face the world side by side." She smiled back, and for a moment the world seemed quiet, peaceful, and safe. The river shimmered beneath them, reflecting not just the golden light of dawn but the promise of a future they would face together. "Together," she repeated. "Yes," he said, "always together." And as the first rays of sunlight broke over the cliffs, casting the temple in a warm glow, Eldrick realized that he was no longer just a king hiding from the world. He was a man who had faced fear, embraced courage, and found redemption not in power, but in the heart of a kind, fearless Omega who had shared her only bread. The city below would remember the Alpha King's return, not for his strength alone, but for the courage to trust, to protect, and to love. And in that trust, in that bond, Eldrick found something more precious than any crown: the promise of a new beginning. The journey was over, yet it had only truly begun.